I want to start this morning by asking you a question. How many of you know what I'm talking about if I talk about Mischief Night? Does anybody know what Mischief Night is here? Could you raise your hands if you do? Really? Just a couple of you. Are you all from the East Coast? Is that right? Yep. I don't think they have Mischief Night here in California. Does someone want to explain to me what Mischief Night is? Austin?
It's the night before Halloween where everyone just goes crazy. Eggs, toilet paper, shaving cream.
Yeah, if there was ever a rationalization for or proof that we are living in an upside down, inside out, topsy-turvy, back-to-front world, it would be the very existence of Mischief Night. That night, one time a year, the night before Halloween, on the East Coast apparently, where we send our perfectly good boys and girls out to terrorize their neighbors. I mean, I was pretty much a goody two-shoes growing up, but there on Mischief Night, all bets were off. I mean, I was there, let's see. Yep, do I not have it on? There I was, winging toilet paper over people's trees, ringing doorbells and running away, soaping people's windows, squirting shaving cream on people's cars, whipping eggs against stop signs. And my only question is, whose idea was this anyway? I mean, did someone really do this on purpose? If I was one of those in charge of planning a community and we got to that part where we were asking which holidays are we going to celebrate, the one where our children go out and vandalize their neighbors' homes, I think I would have left that one out. And I think what it shows us is that not everything that ends up being acceptable in our society, not everything that ends up becoming entrenched in our society is necessarily good for us or makes any kind of sense whatsoever. Well, I never did anything too bad, but one of my friends, when he was young, he and his friends had this incredibly creative but sinister plan that they always wanted to do on Mischief Night. They were hoping one time on Mischief Night to break into the local five and dime store. And they didn't want to break anything, they didn't want to steal anything or do any harm. What they wanted to do is break in and meticulously change every price tag on every item in the store. Can you imagine? So the next morning when the owner comes and opens up and everything looks like it's normal until people start to arrive at the cash register. And suddenly the plasma TV is 87 cents. And the package of bobby pins is $789. Well, sometimes, oh, wait a second. There it is, the price tag. Sometimes I feel like we're living in a world where someone has broken in and changed all the price tags on everything. We see it all around us. We see it in our world, we see it in our nation, we see it in our communities. Sometimes we even see it in our churches and in our homes. I mean, how is it? How is it possible that we know as much as we do about what we're doing to the environment right now, and we're making really silly, stupid, selfish choices, even though every one of us, none of us wants to pass on an uninhabitable world to our children or our grandchildren? How is it possible that we have more knowledge about nutrition and the capability of feeding ourselves more than any other civilization in human history? And yet, we're one of the least healthy nations ever in the world. How is it that we train for these careers that are supposed to give us meaning and purpose in our lives, that are supposed to give us the resources so that we can enjoy our lives and be there for our families? And then they end up consuming us and demeaning us and cutting us off from the very things that we took on these careers to try to protect. How is it possible that we as a nation could have the most stuff of any nation ever in the world and yet still be the least satisfied? That we could know all we know about the human body and exercise and what it does for us and every single kind of chemical reaction that takes place so that we know exercise better than anyone has ever known it, and yet we are sitting on the couch and becoming unhealthier by the minute at the same time. How is it that we could be the strongest nation in the world and yet still be afraid to step outside of our front doors? Something has gone terribly wrong. And one of the worst pieces of this is that instead of facing up to the inherent contradictions, instead of asking ourselves the tough questions that might get us to start thinking about it and making some new choices and doing some new things, is that we just make excuses. We come up with all sorts of rationalizations for why we need cars the size of small school buses and why we need Cheesecake Factory supersized portions of all of our meals and why we need to drink our water out of one-time use disposable plastic bottles. We constantly talk about that we have no choice but to stay in a job that's killing us. We talk about being too busy to eat right and exercise and get rest and sleep, to come to church and pray, when the truth is we are way too busy not to be doing those things. I think one of the worst consequences of us living in a broken and a fallen world is we have failed to recognize what is truly important in this world. We end up becoming distracted by the things that are of little consequence while we ignore the things that are most deserving of our time and our energy. We undervalue what really makes life truly meaningful and joyful while we overvalue and chase after the things which in the end offer little, if any, personal satisfaction. We tuck our kids in bed at night, teaching them to pray, "If I should die before I wake." And what we probably ought to be teaching them is to pray, "God, if I could just wake up before I die." Because we're living in a world where everything is just completely backwards. The values are completely upside down. This is one of the main reasons that Jesus came into the world, that Jesus was sent into the world. It was the role of the prophet, one of Jesus' roles, to shake people and wake them up and say, "What are you thinking? What are you doing?" Jesus came into this world to show us where our priorities lie, to show us the truth about where things have gotten off track, where things have gotten skewed and front to back and backwards, and then to give us the strength, to give us the courage to step out and switch the price tags around, to find a different kind of values. Jesus came for nothing short than a radical revolution of our entire system of values and priorities, the entire world order. Matthew is known as the teaching gospel. And there's no other gospel in the Bible that tells us more, that distills the essence of what Jesus' teachings are, the essence of what this new covenant is all about, more than in the Gospel of Matthew, and particularly in these 3 chapters known as, do you all know? The Sermon on the Mount. That's right. You know, scholars are pretty sure that this wasn't one actual sermon. They have a couple reasons for that. One is that nobody could sit and absorb all that Jesus says in that section in just one sitting. But another reason is because pretty much all of the teachings in there are a distilled down version, but verbatim, word for word, part of teachings that are found in other stories and other parables and other discourses throughout the whole Gospels. And so what the scholars believe is that the Sermon on the Mount is sort of a compendium. It's a compilation. It's the greatest hits of Jesus, if you will, that distills down the very essence of what this new covenant was supposed to be all about. They believe that they pulled this together, you know, as Jesus is getting his disciples together. It's the first thing after he's pulled this new band of people together, and he's trying to get his message out. What do they say? Stay on message. Stay on message. Well, this is Jesus' message. And basically what he's saying is forget everything you've heard before. Because we are starting from scratch. Because almost nothing is the way that it seems. And so it only makes sense that as he starts off the Sermon on the Mount, he would begin it with these 12 verses known as, anyone? The Beatitudes. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." I know that many of you came to our faith because at some point in your life there was this undeniable inkling, there was this growing suspicion and conviction that the values of this world, something was off. That somehow there needed to be more, that somehow maybe there was something out there that would have you live in a different way, with a different set of values and a different set of priorities, that might not just be a deviation from what we're taught as we grow up, but something completely and altogether different. Something almost the opposite. The kingdom of God is this upside-down kingdom, where the first are the last, and the last are the first, the weak are the strong, and the strong are the weak. The things that we think make for the good life are not what God needs or wants for us. I don't know how many of you know who Chuck Yeager is. Anybody here? The first one to do what? Break the sound barrier. Yeah, I guess for a long time they were trying to do this, and a lot of people were getting close, and there was a lot of accidents going on. At one point they thought it was going to be impossible to do because it seemed like everybody, they work on the technology to get the planes to the right place, but then every time that someone would break the sound barrier, they always lose control of the aircraft and crash the planes and die, or else the planes would just disintegrate in the reverberations. And they are never quite sure. And there was this young man named Chuck Yeager who had this idea, this theory, that something happened when you hit the speed of sound that changed all of the controls, that all of the controls when you hit the speed of sound would start to perhaps work backwards. There was a movie a number of years ago that kind of chronicled his life and what he did, and he one day finally had his opportunity to try to test his theory. And so the climax of the movie comes as he goes up and he brings his aircraft to that magical speed of 735 miles an hour. And as he hits that speed of sound, there's that moment where he takes a deep breath and gulps hard, and then instead of pulling the throttle back, which should lift up the nose and send the plane up into the air, he pushes it forward instead. And the theory is right, and the nose goes up, and he breaks through to a freedom and a speed that no human being had ever experienced before. Now, Chuck Yeager himself, after the movie came out, said, it's not quite that simplistic, but it makes a really good sermon illustration. Because this is exactly what Jesus has come into our lives to do. To take the ways that we have gotten used to steering our lives in this world. The things that everyone tells us and have become second nature to us. And to challenge those and say, actually, it's just the opposite. You're used to pulling the stick back. I need you to push the stick forward. I need you to trust me that I'm going to come into your life and I'm going to switch all of the price tags around so that the things you are taught that you're supposed to value the most are the things you're going to value the least. That in this world, we're told that the good life comes through strength and success and wealth and accumulation and victory, or how does Charlie Sheen call it? Winning! But in fact, if you want real joy and real inner peace and real satisfaction out of this life, it's going to come from being poor in spirit, from being humble, from putting others in front of yourself, from putting God in the center of your life. It's going to come from making sure that the first are the last and the last are the first, that in order to save our life, we need to lose our life. It's absolutely the opposite of everything we've understood. As we finish up this series on the DNA of our church, I think there couldn't be a more appropriate follow-up than to do this sermon series on the upside-down kingdom, because really at the heart of it all, for all of the wonderful things about our music and our mission and our worship and our small groups and our education at this church and our youth and our children, at the heart of it all is this completely upside-down system of priorities, these completely different values that Jesus comes into our lives to help us see the mixed up lies that we're being fed our entire lives, and then gives us the courage to live a different kind of life. Gives us a courage to have a different set of values and priorities. And so the question that I'd like to ask you this morning to be prayerful about over the next number of weeks as we launch into this series is, where in your life right now is God wanting to break in and switch the price tags around? Because this is not something that just happens once and for all, that we do just once in our lives. Even after we've given ourselves to God, even after we've dedicated ourselves to the principles of Christ in our lives, the world is constantly bombarding us with a different set of values and priorities. And so this is a day-by-day decision for us to first allow Jesus Christ to come in and to change our values, to change what we see as important, to change where we place our energy and our priorities. But then to give us the courage to actually live it out. And so where in your life is God wanting to switch some price tags? Is God wanting you to push forward on the throttle instead of pulling back on it? Might it have to do with something in your career, in the direction that you're taking your job and your career? Might it have to do with a relationship in your life, whether that's a family member or a friend or a child or a parent? Might it have to do with where you're placing your priority on your time and your energy and your money and your resources? Does it have to do with how you're treating your own body? The way you eat or the way you exercise or don't exercise? Might it have to do with the way you're treating your own spiritual life? One of the most important pieces of any human's existence. The time you spend in prayer or studying the scriptures or just resting in God's presence. If it is true, this quote, that the human mind has an infinite capacity to deceive itself, and the first step is allowing Jesus Christ to come in and show us what reality actually looks like. What's actually important and what just isn't important at all. What actually is deserving of our time and our energy and our attention. And what, in the end, is going to be considered useless. And then allowing Jesus to come in and trusting Jesus bit by bit until we start to see that that something that we at one point thought was upside down starts to look more and more right side up. Amen. We're going to take the offering in just a second, but Tori is going to sing us a song, and it is an unbelievable song. I want you to pay attention very closely to Tori and to the words of this song. I mean, what is it that we actually need? And what is it that we actually want? Is it possible that the things that we think we want, we don't really need, and the things that we think we need are not what we actually want? And that sometimes the greatest blessings come through some of the most difficult times we go through in life. Part of being a Christian, at the core of being a Christian, the thing that makes us special and unique is we believe in this upside-down kingdom where all the values and priorities are turned on their ear. I want you to listen carefully as we collect the morning offering.